Well, thank you very much. You know, I'm excited about this presentation, and the reason it is because I've had such a positive response from people who've been able to accept some of these principles that we're going to talk about. And I really love the fact that we're in a situation where we can actually make some fundamental changes in our life without very much effort. It just takes a little bit of effort to do what we're going to do, but I promise you, you'll all be better communicators when we're done with this tonight if you'll try to apply some of the principles we're going to be talking about. And so we're titling this Owning Your Words, and you'll see why owning your words becomes even more important later on as in the presentation. But we're talking about saying what you mean and mean what you say. Now, why is that so significant? It's because people interpret. Their interpretation of what we're saying depends upon different message systems. I'll get into those in just a minute. But there's number one thing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about maybe defining a little bit here what communication is. But the number one thing about communication, all right, that I'd like you to remember is this definition right here. The communication is an exchange of understanding. It's not talking and listening. And it's an exchange of understanding, kind of like what's in my mind is able to transfer over so that it's in your mind, or vice versa, that we can kind of have that. That's communication. And what communication is not, of course, is just talking, and I'll get into that in a minute. But here's a statement by Harold B. Lee, very President Lee, wonderful statement. He said, "Learn to communicate not only so clearly that you are understood, but so clearly that you're not misunderstood." That's a different level of communicating so that you're not misunderstood. Because how often have most of us found ourselves saying, well, I thought that you meant this, or I thought that you thought, that type of thing right there. So that brings us to this point here. Talking and listening, or if you can read that, but talking and listening are tools. Now, they can help us and they can lead to understanding, but not always. And there's a reason for that. And I kind of like this picture right here. And that's that people are, they're talking back and forth. Look at all the words you're exchanging there. But people talk and listen all the time and fail to communicate. So talking and listening, if we'll think about that as tools. So think of it, you know, you're working on something, they're tools. They're going to help you achieve what we want. And what we want is to have people understand what it is that you need, what you mean, and when you're communicating. So that's why we're going to get into this owning your words and why that's so important. First of all, let's just take a look at some of the common realities that we have to deal with. And this one is that 1 out of every 5 of your communications are misunderstood. And you think that people understand it. Well, 1 out of 5 are misunderstood. It was a very interesting how this study came about. It was done by the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And they were having so much problem with things like the wrong equipment showing up at a job site, or different problems that was causing a lot of time, money. And so they were willing to put out literally over $1 million to do a study on communications. And one of the things they found out in that study, and this is one of the things they found out, was that 1 out of 5 of the communications that people have are misunderstood. And so they wanted to know more why that happened. Why is that? Well, that takes us back to when I'm going to take you back a few years, quite a few years, when I was working on my doctorate at the University of Washington. And at that time, I was one of 8 doctoral students, and we were charged with a commission, if it were, to how can we reduce communication, miscommunication? How can we help people communicate more clearly? And so we went through a whole series of trying to train people how to maybe improve their communications, all right, so that we could reduce this 1 out of 5 error factor. And it was, we tried a number of things. And I'll tell you that most of the ones that we tried failed. Now, I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. We're going to be talking just a minute about how people, for example, the message systems that we use. I'm going to get into that here, and that'll make me a little more sense to you. So this is the kind of a little backdrop to that. Why are 1 out of 5 of our communications misunderstood? Because we misread one of the 3 message systems: verbal, visual, and tone of voice. Those are the 3 message systems that you use when we talk about communications. When you go to read somebody, what is it that they're saying to me? You're trying to figure out what it is that they're saying. Now, obviously, we're programmed so that we don't walk around just so intently in every second, but we're listening, we're talking, we're thinking, etc. How did this misunderstanding? What happens? Well, here's what often happens, of course, is what did she mean by that? And she says, we communicate so well. Well, we communicate so well, and he's wondering what it is that she meant by what she just said. Well, this is why. This brings us into this area right here. This is critical. This is really important that you understand this. 55% of our interpretation of what a person is trying to communicate to us, okay, comes from our perception. We're looking at them and we're reading their body language. Now, look at these. If you can see that young lady's face up there, all right, you got 3 different facial expressions. All right. So if we were to take, let's say, that middle facial expression is up there, and she walks in with that facial expression, and you say, "Are you okay?" And she says, "I'm fine." Would you believe her? And the answer is no, you wouldn't, because you're programmed, and I'm programmed to read body language, and so we read that, and we say that person isn't doing well because I can read their body language. Well, it may be that she is doing well, and she has just a momentary unhappiness. Maybe she ate something, it wasn't pleasant, whatever, but we interpret that. That's so 55% of our interpretation has to do with reading facial expression and body language. Now back to the 8 doctoral students. So we're saying, well, maybe if we train people in body language skills, that'll help reduce miscommunication. So we had our experimental groups. You have your different groups that you try, your control groups, all of that, which we did. By the way, it's kind of fun. If you signed up for a certain classes in sociology as sophomores at University of Washington, you had to agree at the time to be a part of experimental classes that we do. So I'm convinced now, after having done that a lot, that white rats and college sophomores are the 2 most highly tested groups in America. All right. That's what that kind of boils down to. Well, we tried, guess what happened? We get down with this, and now we test them on their communication skills. 1 out of 5 are still miscommunicating. Well, have you heard of neuro-linguistic programming? Does that ring any bells? Okay, this is another one where you're actually trying to reading the eyes of the people, and it has about a 65 to 75% accuracy, meaning that you can be pretty accurate on that. But still, if it's even 80% accurate, that means that 1 out of 5 of your communications are still going to be misunderstood. And so we tried that. We tried a number of different things, and it was so frustrating because it didn't seem to change the 1 out of 5 error factor in the communications. So, well, here's the next reason. That's tone of voice. People respond to the tone of voice. Now, that's 37%. That's the weight. Now, when I use these numbers, these are the averages of using hundreds of people and testing them. So individually, you could be on a spectrum where that's going to change. You can kind of see that you might be a little different than that. You might not be average, as it were, but most people are in that range where 55% is facial expression and body language, and 37% is the tone of voice. Would you please take out the garbage? Well, yes, but you don't have to be snippy. I said please. Did you not hear the word please? Did the word please get lost in the tone of voice? The word please did get lost, and I believe it did. In your minds, it got lost, all right? And so we listen to tone of voice, and that's how we discern what it is the person really means. Well, I'm going to tell you also that ladies are better at body language reading than men are. They just are. That's been proven over and over again. So, but even with that skill, still 1 out of 5 miscommunications. Tone of voice. Different families, different ways, and different cultures. The information I'm giving you now applies primarily to America, Canada, and mostly in Europe too, but not to the Asian cultures. The Asian cultures put emphasis, so they don't have a 37% tone of voice. They have more like 50 to 60% on tone of voice. They really do that. If you've ever watched a Japanese movie or an Asian movie, you'll notice it goes something like this. In other words, their facial expression doesn't change a lot, but their tone of voice does. And you go, whoa, what is that? And because they're communicating more using their tone of voice than they are just using facial expressions like we might do in our culture. So yes, cultures change a little bit, but since we're talking about where we are now and the culture that you were primarily raised in, that's why I think this is significant. We look at tone of voice. Now let's take a look at how important are the words that people actually use. 8% credibility. 8% is all we give credibility to what it is that people are actually saying. Now, let's go back to our original premise, the importance of owning your words. Because here's what we did. And I'm going to take credit for this because I said, I'd like to try something. I'd like to experiment. And since that's what we were doing, I said, let's see if we held people 100% accountable for their words. Not 50%, not 55%, not 37%. What if we said, to improve our communications, we're going to actually believe your words. We're going to focus on what it is that you actually say, and we're going to give credibility to that. What happens when we do that? Well, it was phenomenal. We couldn't believe the change. We couldn't believe it. Instead of, and I'll report this a little bit later too, but instead of 1 out of 5 errors, only 1 out of 50. Do you have any idea how significant that is? 1 out of 5 versus 1 out of 50 errors. When people became accountable 100% for their words, that means that it's a little hard to do, but it's not that hard. When I say it's hard to do is when you and I are trained to read body language and tone of voice, and that's all that we're trained to do. And I say, all of a sudden, I want you to be 100% accountable for your words. And so we're going to believe your words. That's what we're going to put our whole weight is going to be on your words. Now, where did the 1 out of 50 come in? Well, semantics. Words don't always mean the same things to people. And so that's where the error factor came in, is 1 out of 50 is, I thought that word meant something a little differently than the other person thought. So that's the error factor there. But I promise you, you will improve your communication skills if we can go to the point where you can own your words. Just really own them, meaning I'm going to say what I mean, I'll mean what I say, but I'll do it in a kindly way. See, if you think of it that way, I'm going to own my words, but I'll do it in a kindly way. I don't have to be crude or anything else about it. But so that's what it boiled down to. It boiled down to 55% of our communication currently. We're looking at body language and facial expression. We're looking at tone of voice here, 37%, and we're also looking at the actual words, only 8%. So what's our, I kind of like this picture here because we're looking at what's our enemy? What's keeping us from being a little bit more, where's the enemy? Well, I'll tell you what the enemy is. The enemy is hint dropping. One of the enemies. It's not the only one, but it's the major one. All right. And that is that most of us were raised, 80% of us, as a matter of fact, are raised in hint dropping societies where in our families, people didn't always come out and actually tell you directly what they wanted, but they often expected you to kind of figure it out a little bit, and you probably did figure it out pretty well. And I'm going to tell you a couple of stories that they're really two of my very favorite stories that I want to share with you. And the first one has to do with my mother, who I call the queen of all hint droppers, all right? And she and her family, it was just amazing because I can look back now, having studied this pretty extensively for decades, and it's interesting that I came from a family that was really so heavily into hint dropping that people did not own their words. They expected you to figure out that Colonel Mustard did it in the kitchen with a lead pipe. And if you ever played the game of Clue, you know what I'm talking about. It was always about hints, and then you had to figure out what it was. And I remember as a young married man getting married and expecting my wife to pick up on all of my hints, and she didn't. She wasn't raised in that environment. And so I'm thinking, why doesn't she do that? Why? She should be getting this. I mean, look at all these marvelous hints that I've been giving. I'll give you the classic story. Here's my mother and father. They're in the kitchen. And my dad, I don't think, was raised in as much of a hint-dropping society as my mother was. But my mother was one of 3 sisters. And if, for example, the following little experience happened, they would all know exactly what to do. But here's what happened. I'm probably a teenager around 15, 16, 17 years of age. I'm sitting there and watching my father and mother in the kitchen. And I was also watching a black and white television, if you can believe that. I hate to go back that far, but that's when those times were. Nevertheless, I'm sitting there and I'm kind of looking at this, and my parents are over there. And my mother goes like this. She goes, 3 distinct sniffs. I knew what she meant immediately. I was raised by, that was my mother. I was raised by the queen of all hint droppers. And that meant something stinks. My dad didn't know that. My dad's standing right next to her. So she makes those 3 sniffs. And what I knew she wanted was she wanted the garbage out. That's what that meant, by the way, is those sniffs. But if you're not raised in upper division sniffology, so you wouldn't know that. But I was raised in upper division sniffology, so I knew what those sniffs. My dad, he didn't know that. And he reached in his back pocket and did what all real true men did in those days. They pull out a white hanky and offered it to her. So he offers this white hanky, right? And guess what she does? She looks at it with disgust. She has to go to clue number 2. I didn't get her on clue number 1. Now, in my aunts, all 3 of my aunts and my grandmother, anybody sniffs like that, they're immediately looking for a dirty diaper. They're looking for something that stinks. That's what they're looking for. But not my dad. He pulled out the hanky and offered it to her. Now she moves to clue number 2. And I've got to tell you, if you don't get it by the second clue, you don't get credit, even if you do what it was that the person wanted you to do. So in the case of my mother, she wanted the garbage out. I knew she wanted the garbage, and I'm sitting there thinking, I'm probably going to be winding up taking out the garbage. But anyway, I'm sitting there thinking this, and my dad is, but I'm in hysterics almost. I tried to control that because he didn't get it, and I thought it was funny that he didn't get it. So he pulled out his hanky, he offered it the hanky. She looks at it with this disgusting look and goes, no. Clue number 2, can't you smell it? Now, what she wanted, of course, was the garbage out. But we're not going to ask, honey, would you mind taking out the garbage? Oh, no, that's far too simple. See? Let's just drop a few hints, and they should pick up on those hints, and then they'll know if they can just figure out what those hints mean, exactly what to do. Well, my dad couldn't smell a dead skunk in front of him. I mean, right there, wouldn't smell it. But he gives it the old college try, go, tries to smell and see if he can. He goes, no, I can't smell it. What is it? Well, she moves to the 3rd and final clue, which you get no credit for. She turns and stares at the garbage. The garbage was under the sink behind 2 doors. Fixated. My dad looks at her and kind of follows her eyes over, and he goes, and it was like a revelation. He goes, you want the garbage out? And she's just exhausted. She goes, do I have to draw you a picture? And what's the answer to that question? Yes, you do. If it's your expectation, you have to communicate it so clearly that you're not misunderstood. And so, yes, you have to draw a verbal picture that's very clear so the person knows what it is that you really want. So I'm going to tell you that it's a hard thing to let go of, but it's a wonderful thing to let go of if you want to be understood and if you want to reduce the amount of frustration in your life. And so do you have to paint them a picture? And the answer is yes, you do. You have to paint a picture. And it's got to be so clear that they can't misunderstand that. And she could have solved that whole problem had she just said, honey, would you mind taking out the garbage? Now, I'm going to tell you how that story ended. The story ended, my dad goes, you want the garbage out? And she's, do I have to draw you a picture? Son, get in there and get that garbage out, and I mean now. That's how that story ended. And I'm sitting there thinking, I knew I'd be taking out the garbage. I knew it. The moment that mom started sniffing. But lo and behold, here we are. Well, and interesting that we grow up with these kind of traditions in our families. They're different. Maybe yours isn't quite as extreme as mine was on that. And yet, I have found it to be very prevalent in our society, especially here in America, that we have that tendency. Now, a couple that I counseled, this happened to be in California a few years ago. In fact, it was a number of years ago. And as I'm sitting there visiting with them, I said, so how long you folks been married? And the woman said, 51 years. But the man was shaking his head. He was going like this. And I'm going, you can't agree that, so I asked him, I said, you can't agree you've been married 51 years? He goes, I've been married 1 year, 51 times. I don't know more about her now than I did after a year of being married to her. And I kind of startled, I chuckled a little bit, but I said, what do you mean? I said, can you give me an example? And he says, have you ever seen a wet chicken? I go, well, yeah, I've seen a wet chicken. You know when they fluff their feathers, when they get wet? Well, that's what she does. I get up, I do something. I don't know what it is I've done, but I've done something that upset her. And she's kind of over there, kind of fluffing her feathers. And I know she's upset. And so I say, what's wrong? And she says, you know. And I go, I really don't know what I've done or what said or did or whatever. And she says that I just need to figure it out. And we've been married long enough that I should figure it out. Well, I haven't figured it out yet. So I've been married 1 year, 51 times. Okay. So I asked her, I said, well, you got to help me out here. Give me an idea what you mean by the challenge that you're facing. She said, I will be happy to. We were driving in the car. It was a very hot day. And I looked at him and I said, dear, it's very hot. And he looked right back at me and said, it really is. And kept right on driving. Anybody know? Come on out there. Anybody know what she wanted? What she want? Answer. What she want?
She probably wanted her to stop and get a drink.
Or maybe, or yeah, or
turn on the air conditioning.
Yeah, turn on the air conditioning, right? Or run on the something. Probably the air conditioning. That's what she later said she wanted. I said, well, what happened? Well, he just kept driving, and then he gave me a 5-minute discourse on how hot it was. So now the man is saying, you know what, it is hot today, honey. In fact, you heard him say you could fry an egg on the hood. I bet we could fry an egg on the hood today. I'll bet you it's that hot. We could probably fry an egg on the hood. And of course, she's over there fluffing her feathers. See, she's upset. And he's going, what's wrong? I asked you to turn on the air conditioning. No, you didn't. You said it was hot and I agreed with you. Listen to her answer. I thought do I have to draw you a picture? Is that funny? That's what my mom said. Do I have to draw you a picture? And of course I said to her, yes, you do. I said, and you're not a clear communicator. I said, what you did is called hint dropping. And you're dropping these hints. No, it isn't. If you say it's really hot, the person knows to turn on the air conditioner. No, they don't. Because you see, what you've made is a declarative statement. If you really want to get technical, and we're going to get into language here, technically, when you make a statement, it's really hot, that's called a declarative statement. It's not a request for a behavioral change. You're not asking, that's not, if you will here, a question that you're asking the person to make a behavioral change on. You're not. You're making this declarative statement. It's really hot. Well, when somebody says then a declarative statement, they should know that you mean that that's what you should do. No, and that's where our misunderstandings come in. That's just one. I'm giving you that as an example. So I said to her, I'm not trying to offend you, but I'm telling you, you're not a clear communicator. You need to own your words. You need to actually say what you mean and mean what you say. But it's really clear, a really clear picture that he gets that. She said, well, he doesn't get it. And I said, well, if you would have said, dear, would you mind turning on the air conditioning? Now, if he said something like, you got a broken arm, you turn on yourself, go ahead and be mad at him, But if he said, dear, would you mind turning on the air conditioning? And he said, I'd be happy to. Click. And I asked him, I said, what would you do if she said that to you? I'd turn on the air conditioning. She said, well, that wasn't the end of it. I said, it wasn't the end of it. I can hardly wait. Tell me the end of this story. I said, what happened? Well, he turned on the air conditioning. Well, how'd you feel about it? I was still upset with him. She was still upset, see, that he didn't get it. So she's frustrated that he didn't get it. Boy, the tragedy of that is that they did that for 51 years. That's the tragedy of that story. And he later said to me, where were you 51 years ago? And I said, well, 51 years ago, I wasn't born yet. Anyway, that happened. I was about 35, 40 years old. Anyway, so it turns out that he said, this isn't the end of the story. She said that. Well, what's the end of the story? Now we get to this point. The end of the story is that she looked up ahead, and there was the stores in California, like Circle K's, and they're like 7-Eleven stores. You can stop, at least they used to be, and they're just a convenience store. Well, she said, I looked up ahead, and I could see this convenience store, and it was about a block and a half away. So I looked at that store, and I looked at him, and he looked over at me, and I looked right at him. Then I looked up at that store again up there. I looked at him and looked at that store. And then I said very clearly, dear, I'm very thirsty. And he said, what happened? And he said, we drove right by that store. I said, well, I'm not sure that's clear communications. You expected him. I said, we got to get some input from him. So I turned to him. I said, now you got to tell me what was the first thought that entered your mind when she said that? Well, I thought she was thirsty. Good. That's good. Now, what was the second thought that entered your mind? Well, we're about 5 minutes from the home. I'm going to put the pedal to the metal and get this woman home and get her something to drink. So he blows by the 7-Eleven or Circle K at about 70 miles an hour, whatever it was, and she's fluffing her feathers. She's mud. She's upset. What's wrong now? I told you I was thirsty. Why didn't you stop back there at that place to get me something to drink? I think in her family they would have. I believe in her family, had they said that, then they'd be looking for the next various place they could stop to get something to drink. But Bonnie, maybe you can come up here and help me. I'd like it. This is my wife, Bonnie, and she's a very good communicator. So, Bonnie, what would a really good communicator say so that they wouldn't have that problem about stopping at that 7-Eleven or Circle K?
Honey, there's a Circle K coming up, and I am very thirsty. I would like to stop and have a big gulp, 32-ounce, big gulp, Diet Sprite with lots of ice.
Wow. Now, if I bring back root beer, throw it at me, right? See, not because that's clear communication. Could you misunderstand what she meant? Very clear. There's a 7-Eleven coming up or Circle K coming over. Would you mind stopping on 32-ounce, big gulp, Diet Sprite, lots of ice, right? Okay. Now that's content communication. And that's the word that we coined there at the University of Washington for it. Content, meaning the content of your words. What is your words asking for? What is the content of the information that you sent to me? Well, her content right there was very clear. So we call that person a content communicator, that I can trust that what the content of what you're saying is what you really mean. So that's the content. That's what that word means for us, all right? So you're a content communicator. Bonnie's an excellent content communicator. Well, Bonnie, since you were helping me out here, I think I'd like to have you come back and help me out with this here. Here is the 85-year-old woman's birthday party that never happened. Maybe you can give us a little background on that.
Okay. This 85-year-old woman, or she's coming up on her 85th birthday, and her family said to her, Mom, let's have a big party for you. We'll invite all the people in our church. We'll invite our family. We'll invite other people that you know. We'll just have a big shindig for this party, or for this 85th birthday. And she said, oh no, don't make a big fuss. Just a cake and the family will do.
Okay, so I have her in a situation where we're counseling, and she says, I just don't know about my family. I said, what do you mean? She says, oh, I just had my 85th birthday party, and all we had was a cake and a few family members. I said, well, did they not offer to have a bigger celebration? Well, yes. What do you mean, yes? Well, they wanted to have a big to-do about the whole thing, but I told them not to worry, just to, not to make a big fuss over it. And they didn't. They just got me a cake, and it's kind of some immediate family members were there. And I said, well, that's what you said you wanted. Well, they should have known. That was her response. They should have known. Meaning what? Meaning don't believe the words that I say. Are you following me on this? Don't believe the words that I actually speak to you. I want you to read my mind. I want you to be a mind reader. I want you to actually figure out what it is that I really mean without me having to say it. Wow. Do you know how dysfunctional that is from a communication standpoint? That's out there. That's right. Son of perdition kind of sin. That's where it is. Because you're not owning your words. You're just doing the opposite of what President Lee asks us to do, to communicate not only so clearly that you're understood, but so clearly that you're not misunderstood, which comes to, I say, it's a whole other level of communicating. Well, those of us that expect other people to read their minds are doing two things that are going to be very frustrating. One, we're going to set them up for failure. All right? And you're going to set yourself up to be frustrated. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute here. But remember I said that when you become a content communicator, when you own your words, when you say what you mean and you mean what you say and you do it in a kindly way, only 1 out of 50 of your communications will be misunderstood. But it's really helpful if you get people to agree, to say, listen, I want you to know and that I really mean what I say. So if you say, do you want to go to this place or do you want to do that? And if I say yes or no, that's what I really mean. Now, what happens for most of us is that we don't believe the person, and so we ask them 5 or 6 times. Are you sure you don't want to do this? Are you really thought about it? Are you really sure? And meaning that we don't really believe that initial input. And so we have to ask 4 or 5 times to have them reassure us that that's what they truly, really want, because we're not sure of what they want. See? And I'm saying, wouldn't it be great if we could own our words sufficiently that people could just say, do you really mean what you say? And you say what you mean. Can you do that? Well, that's going to take us to this other point here. I want to point out right here. Okay. Now, I think you can see this, all right? I'm going to hold this. It's because this is a stick, and I'm going to slide it along here, and you can see that this stick has on one side of it, it says frustration, and as you roll it on over here, you'll see the other side of the stick says expectation. Well, there's no such thing as somebody who's frustrated that didn't have an expectation. All frustration is tied to expectation, all of it. And so just think about that for a moment. When you pick up one end of this stick, you pick up both ends of the stick. So I'm here now, here's one end of the stick, I've just picked up both ends of the stick. Well, if my expectation is that people are supposed, how about, let's talk about some ridiculous expectations. Here's one. I'm going to be happy when everybody that I love does everything I want them to do the way I want it done. What have you just done? You just resigned yourself to be unhappy. And you've also turned over your happiness and the responsibility for your happiness to everybody else performing in a certain way before you're going to be okay. Interesting. Well, expectations and frustrations. And so we talk about having maybe realistic expectations. And a realistic expectation is that you can own your words and that people can come to believe you. And that's what we want. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up and you're setting somebody else up to fail. But you're setting yourself up to be frustrated. I don't enjoy being frustrated. But I guess some people enjoy being frustrated because they don't want to change that behavior, even sometimes if they know about it. So that gets us back to this primary thing about owning your words. So content communication focuses on the words you use and believe you, all right? And we will believe you. If you say you're okay, then we'll believe that you're okay. This means, again, this holds right back to this principle right here. We're saying you're going to be 100% responsible for your words, 100%. That means I don't have to try to interpret. I don't have to try to figure out what that facial expression is that you have. Because, see, I'm not quite sure if that twist of the mouth means, does it mean this or does it mean that? And does the eyebrow being lifted up slightly mean something? Do I need to interpret that to be, what a burden we're putting on people to try to be body language readers and tone of voice readers, when if we could simplify that. I think even if we moved from the 1 out of 50, by the way, you could even move to 1 out of 25, if you just improved 50% on owning your words, all right, to be able to do that. So Bonnie, could you come up here for a moment and maybe help me out with one more little thing? In fact, you're even on the slide here, Bonnie, look at that.
Oh, am I?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
See? Would you like to go out for dinner?
Oh, yes, I would like to go out for dinner.
Do you care where we go?
No, I don't care.
Let's do Chinese.
Oh, no, we did Chinese last week.
All of a sudden, I'm having a problem, folks. What's the problem? She's not communicating clearly. Do you want to go to? Yeah, I got that. Let's do Chinese. Do you care? Do you care what? No. Okay, let's do Chinese. No, I don't want to do that. Just a minute. I thought you said you didn't care. Do you see the part of this I'm getting? Now, that's normal. I'm not trying to beat up anybody here. I'm telling you, that's normal. But it's not a good normal. Even if it's normal, it's not a good normal. So there is a way to respond to that, and I want to give that to you. That is to say this: I'm not sure what I want. How would you say that?
I'm not sure where I'd like to go. Run a few things past me and we'll decide.
See, that's a perfect response. If she doesn't know what she wants to do, then you say, I don't know what I want to do. I'm not sure what sounds good. Why don't you run a few things by me and I'll give you a reaction to it. Now we're communicating. But to say, I don't care, and then all of a sudden, do care. Well, let's do Mexican.
No.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to have Chinese tonight. Hope you have an enjoyable dinner. No, that sounds rude. But the idea being that, look how frustrated I am. I'm trying to please her. I asked her if she'd like to go out. She said yes, but I can't seem to please her. But I would feel like I'm pleasing her if she said, I really don't know what I want. Why don't you run a few things by me? Well, let's do Chinese. Let's do Mexican. Let's do the Italian place.
Yes, I'll go to the Italian.
Italian place sounds good? Okay, thank you, dear. I appreciate that. Wow, at least we get to eat tonight, right? So what we call that is clearly owning your expectations. Now, because I was a young man and I was a hint dropper, and when Bonnie had said, and by this time we'd had 4 or 5 children, and Bonnie had made the statement. She said, "Oh, that couch! I hate that couch. It's worn out. And I'm kind of embarrassed. I've been putting stuff over the top to cover the worn out spots and stuff." And I'm thinking, I'm going to surprise her. I'm going to get her a new couch, but I'm not going to tell her. Now, in my family, all right, surprise was a really important thing to do. You wanted to surprise people. Well, and guess what? So I would get my mother a gift. I had to be an only child, but I'd get my mother a gift, and she would ooh and ah over it, and then put it away someplace where I'd never see it again. All right? And have you had that where maybe your mother-in-law or somebody gets you something that you really don't particularly like, but mother-in-law is going to come over and you kind of take it out of the closet and put it back on the shelves where they can see that you got it for them? I mean, it's not something you really wanted. Not that anybody would really do that in real life, but those kind of behaviors kind of come out of not communicating clearly about our expectations sometimes. Well, in this case, my mother was doing, so I'm going to get my wife a new couch. So I went to a place like R.C. Willey, if you know where that place is like. It was like that. And it was a massive kind of a warehouse type of a place. And I walked in and I'm looking for a couch. Now, 1 out of 8 men are colorblind. Did you know that? 1 out of 8 men are colorblind. And the rest of us, even if we're not colorblind, are not very good at choosing colors, all right, and color coordinating. And that's why wives do a wonderful job of helping us in that area, in that arena specifically. I walked in and I could see, I must have been a half a football field away, and I could see this couch. It was a bright, kind of a white couch with all kinds of coloring on it. Do you see the couch? Now, some of you reacted the same way I did. Wow, look at that couch. Boy, is she going to be surprised when I bring home this couch. So I made special arrangements with the store so that she would be gone, doing a young woman's activity Saturday. And I said, I need you to bring it Saturday morning at such and such a time. Between this time slot, 3 hours, she's going to be gone. So they brought it, and we brought it in the house, and we set it up in the front room. And so now my wife comes home and sees this couch for the first time. And guess what her reaction was? Wow! Just eyes like that. Now, and I said to her, honey, that's the same reaction I had when I saw it. It just jumped right out at me, just right there, just jumped right out at me. And she goes, yeah. Now, I think I need you back here to kind of help me with the rest of the story, Bonnie. Why don't you kind of tell them what happened?
Well, so I called a friend of ours who was an interior decorator and said,
Marilyn, her name's Marilyn.
Marilyn, could you come over and tell John what you think about this couch?
So Marilyn, our interior decorator, walks in and goes, wow. I mean, I go, Marilyn, everybody's had that reaction to that couch.
What you need to know is our colors in our front room were autumn colors, orange and
Brown.
We had shingles on one wall, and it was quite well put together.
Yeah, so here's Marilyn now. She's walking around with a piece of paper and pencil. Are you going to keep it? I said, keep that couch? Yeah, that's a center figure right here. Yeah, we want to keep that couch. Okay, it's going to cost you about $8,000. We got to put in new curtains. We're going to have to change the wallpaper over here. We have to change that. You're going to have to carpet, wall, curtains. $8,000. That couch is going back today. We got to get a couch. And so the couch, that was the end of the couch. So I hope whoever has this couch is happy. I don't know. Believe me, you won't find many couches like this. You have to look hard to find a couch like this. It just jumped right out at me. I don't know. It was pretty amazing. Well, that takes us back to this other whole idea of owning your expectation and a surprise. Now, as a young married man, I also bought my wife 3 dresses. I had the right size and everything, but they weren't, and she was very gracious of receiving them and just asked me if I had the receipt, and I did, and took all 3 back over a period of time. And I said, so you're not really into surprises, are you? She said, no, I'm not. She said, I'd much rather know. She said, why don't I give you a list of several things, and if you buy anything on that list, I'll be happy. All right, I'll be happy with it, rather than surprise me with something. But if you had that value growing up, that's surprising something, even if you surprised them with something they didn't like, I mean, that's just kind of a warped thing, but nevertheless, imagine that. And so it turns out that lo and behold, I'm happy now for Christmas or birthdays or Valentine's Day or anything else to simply say, is there something that you would really like? And have her say, yes, I would really like this. Or say, you know, I have an allergy and you bring me those kind of flowers, I'm going to be running nose and I'm going to be blurry eyed. I'm not going to be, oh, I see. Okay, yeah, I probably want to surprise her with something like that, right? So the idea is that maybe those are things we could discuss and be able to say, I can maybe change my value system a little bit so I don't try to surprise you with something that really is not something you want, because behind my desire to surprise you is my desire to please you. And if pleasing you means not surprising you, then I'm happy to do that. And so that takes us back to this principle right here, which is to clearly own your expectations. And that's where I used that stick before. I think I'll bring it up now. But I'm going to tell you a story in connection with it. This story took place in a far distant community called Farmington, Utah. Now, in Farmington, we had there was one family. They had a very large family, but they're having 5 divorces at once in the family, same time going on among their married children, 5 of them. They had more than 5 children, by the way, but there were 5 divorces at once. And so I was invited to come up to see if there was some kind of issue there that I might be able to discern. And so they invited me on a Sunday. I went up on the Sunday and we had a wonderful dinner. And so there's a long table and I've interviewed all the couples, all 5 of them, and the mom and dad. And we're having this dinner now. And we're waiting and I was going to talk to them afterwards as a group and then individually kind of meet with them, see if we take care of that. But I noticed while we're having dinner that when Grandpa, who was sitting at the head of the table, he wanted something, he didn't ask for it. He kind of did what my mother did a little bit. But he went directly to step number 3. He stared at what he wanted. He just stared at it. And I looked at him and I go, oh, interesting. Then I looked at all of the in-laws, all 5 of them that were going to get divorced, all 5 of them. Not one of the in-laws picked up on it. All of the kids did. They looked at Dad, and the one that was the first respondent said, Grandpa, would you care for the potatoes? And they were right next to the peas. And he goes, no. And stared again, didn't say. And so, would you care for the peas? There came the peas. So afterwards, I'm sitting on the couch with Grandpa, and I say, Grandpa, since everybody called him Grandpa, he wasn't offended by that. Grandpa, why didn't you ask for the peas? Well, if you have to ask, it doesn't mean as much. That is the opposite of owning your words. That is the exact opposite. If you have to ask, it doesn't mean as much. Because if people are mind readers, you see, it's even better. If they can discern what you mean without having to ask for it, why, it means they really are truly tuned into you. Boy, do you realize the expectations that you're setting? You're setting people up to fail. And you're setting yourself up to be frustrated. All in one fell swoop with that kind of set of expectations. So what I'm suggesting here is we need to very carefully look at this and say, wow, am I owning my expectations? If it doesn't mean as much if you have to ask, yes, it does. It means a whole bunch, because 1, you're not going to be frustrated. And 2, you might actually get what you want. Wow, wouldn't that be interesting to actually get what you want in a communication with somebody, because you were able to own your expectations so clearly that they couldn't misunderstand. So that comes back to another point. And I'm going to, we're going to do a little bit of a switch here now on owning your words to appropriately communicating in the various relationships that we have. Now, all relationships are going to fall into one of 3 categories. You're going to either be a boss, you're going to be a co-worker, or you're going to be an employee. You're going to be a mom or dad. You're going to be a sibling on an equal status here, or you're going to be a child. Now, those three are, you can put them in another structure, but you will find that whatever you interact in our society, you're wearing one of those three hats. I remember one time when I was serving as a bishop that we were having an area meeting of bishops, and I was one of 37 bishops, and we're sitting there in this meeting, and I got a little note that said, your stake president's outside, he wants to talk to you. Well, in that meeting with my fellow bishops, what was my relationship? It was a relationship of equals, right? And language is appropriate to stewardship, and that's what we're going to talk about. So I was called out, but the moment I stepped out of that meeting with those 36 other bishops, the moment I got in that meeting there, here's my stake president, all of a sudden we switched roles. Now he's in a role of being like a boss or a parent, all right? And I'm in the role of being like a child. And that's perfectly all right. And those are legitimate roles. There's nothing not wrong with those roles at all. But there's words that are consistent with stewardships. So for example, as a boss, it's appropriate for me to use the words should, need, and ought. Those are perfectly appropriate. For a parent to say, you should do this, you need to do this, and you ought to do that. That's perfectly appropriate because that's parent language, that's stewardship language at that level, that's great. And so we call that directive language. Now, it's not appropriate for a husband and wife to use those words with each other because you see, husbands and wives are equals. And the language of equals sounds like this. It would mean a lot to me. I would appreciate it if, would you consider? See, that's the language of equals, but it's not the language of a parent. And you're not a child. You're not asking for permission because if you were a child, I want to go back to maybe a coworker, first of all. If you're a coworker and another coworker comes up to you and starts using these words, you know what you should be doing here and what you ought to be doing and what you need to be doing? The moment that coworker who's on the same status as you are starts using those words, you're going to find feelings welling up inside of you of resentment. Who are you to tell me what to do? You're not my boss. You're going to find those kind of feelings are going to well up inside. Well, because he's out of stewardship. So language is appropriate to stewardship. And if a child is telling a parent what they should, need, and not to do, that's out of stewardship too. They may be right sometimes, but that's still out of stewardship. The point is, and for example, with child language, call it child language for a minute, or employee language, it's permission language. May I? Can I? Boss, I've got a thought about how I think we can improve our sales, and I'd like to try it if you give me permission to do that. That's perfectly appropriate, but you see, that's permission language. And so if you're an employee or you're a child, Mom, can I stay overnight across the street at Fred's place? You know, here's a young man asking his wife, they're probably both 14 years of age or something, and they're friends, their parents feel good about it, but he's asking for permission to do that. That's permission language. So are we speaking the appropriate language that's consistent with the stewardships that we're dealing with? Now, the rest of that story. After my stake president left, where I had one hat on, all right, I had the hat of being an equal as bishop. I stepped out, I put the hat on of a child, so to speak, or employee with the stake president. And before I got back to the meeting, it was held in our stake center, our ward, where I was the bishop. And so one of my ward members came up to me. At that moment, my hat just changed again. Boom. Now I'm the father of the ward, right? And that person is kind of the child in the ward, father-child relationship. So I just went from three different positions, a bishop of an equal with the other bishops, to a child, there's the stake president, to all of a sudden my putting on the hat, talking to the ward member. Now, we still own our words and we're kindly. We're not trying to be dictatorial in any of that. But are you getting the point that there's language is appropriate to stewardship? So I'm going to encourage all of you to think seriously, especially in the husband-wife relationship or your significant other relationship, that somebody that's on an equal status with you, to avoid words that really are not appropriate for that stewardship. So words like should, need, and ought really, really don't belong there at all. All right? I don't know if later we're going to have it open for questions and answers, and you can ask me any questions that you might on that. Now, here's another thought. Expectations. Expectations bring frustrations. And that's what I've meant by picking up the stick. You have both ends, expectation and frustration. Great initiator, great responder. If I have the expectation that another person is supposed to initiate something that's important to me, all right, I'm setting them up for failure and I'm setting myself up to be frustrated. But what if I own that? What if I own that expectation? I'm going to give you an example of what I mean by that. the great initiator, great responder is don't expect your significant other to be the one to initiate. Let them be great responders and give them credit for it. Oops, and give them credit for it. I'll give you an example here. I had an expectation as a young married man. I still have it today, by the way. That expectation, it would mean a lot to me. And I said that to my wife. It'd mean a lot to me when I came home, and I came home at different hours. But if you could just kind of, when I come home, I'll kind of let you know I'm home. Just let me know where you are. And then I'd like to just get kind of maybe a hug and a kiss. Not passion, not sexually, just a hug and a kiss of affection and acceptance. That would merely mean a lot to me. But why don't you come up here and justify and defend yourself here, since I put you on the spot. Watch out for that right there.
So sometimes I would forget. Or I'd be taking care of children.
So I say, honey, I'm home. Hi. What happened to the hug and the kiss? And I'm expecting her to respond. And hi, have a good day today? Yeah, till now. Right? Because I had the expectation. Well, I'm going to give you a way to alleviate a lot of frustration, folks. And that's what this is all about, improving our communications. Own your expectations in the present as if the person that you care about has Alzheimer's and has no memory at all of everything that's important to you. What if you just assume that? What if you just, I assume then that Bonnie is not going to remember everything that's on my priority list. All right? I can maybe remember one or two things, but in terms of somehow thinking the way she thinks at any given moment in time, that is a really unrealistic expectation. Thank you. And so my expectation was, I'm just going to say, for example, I'm home. I'm here for a hug and a kiss. Now that's owning the expectation in the present. Well, guess what happens? She's a great responder. She may not be a great initiator or have a great memory about everything that's important. But what if I own that in the present? Do you see what that does? It takes away a lot of frustration in a relationship. So I can say, honey, I'm home. I'm here for a hug and a kiss. She goes, but even now, I think it's a little bit of a revelation to her that that's still important to me. And I'm just talking about affection, not anything else other than that, just a communication. And that becomes, now, and I'm willing to do things in her love language, and that's why we're going to talk about love language when we get together next time. So I think you'll find that interesting. We get into talking about how we have different love languages. We'll get into that here. So owning that expectation is there. So here we are. I'm home, and I'm here for a hug and a kiss. And I've got to tell you, down there it has a little footnote, Mrs. Finley. Now, I've got to tell you, she's a wonderful lady, and I speak of her with the highest regard and the highest respect. Mrs. Finley is, and she's passed away, but she was the wife of the Supreme Court Justice for the state of Washington. All right? And they had, garden parties, they had teas, they had dinners that were elaborate. The President of the United States, by the way, stopped by. The Secret Service, we were the house next door. And so here's Judge Finley, and then we're the large Mormon family next door. We 8 children, okay? So we're the large Mormon family next door. And Mrs. Finley, if you've ever heard of the word, or the lady Emily Post, does that ring a bell with some of you? If you're a little older, you'll know that she was the woman that wrote all the books on etiquette. What's appropriate? Which forks to use? Etiquette on every detail of life. Mrs. Finley, I think, taught her how to act. Now, that's how sophisticated. Mrs. Finley would dress up till they say the nines, right, to pull weeds out of her herbal garden. Now, I'm sitting there looking out of my window, my office. I'm looking out like this, and Mrs. Finley is dressed up with a bonnet, and she's got these, accordion-like things on her arm, and she's got an apron, and she's got a little basket, and is wearing gloves and stuff. And but it's the latest of the latest. And she's out there, and she's over, and her herbal garden was elevated garden. She's pulling the weeds out and putting them in the basket, and then going over and emptying them out. And I'm going, nobody's looking. Why would somebody dress up like that just to go out to pull weeds? Just pull them suckers out of the ground, lady. You don't need to dress up to do that. Are you getting the idea how sophisticated this lady is? And then I said to myself, I'm looking at her. She probably dressed up for me. I don't think she did, but that's just who she was. And she didn't care. I think she just felt good about being that kind of a person. And she's a wonderful lady. So you got a picture now. With that much of a background, you can appreciate what I'm going to tell you now. Mrs. Finley is in our kitchen, and she's making Bonnie feel like Bonnie is doing her a favor by taking a pot roast off of her hands, because her husband had been called out quickly and she was going to have this pot roast for her husband that night. But since he'd been called out, she came over and asked if we, the large Mormon family next door, she didn't do it in a way that made us feel, that we were somehow needy or whatever. We weren't. We were fine, thank you. But the point being that she was so gracious in doing it that she made you feel like you were doing her a favor to do this. That's what Mrs. Finley, Lund, but I didn't know it's Mrs. Finley. So I'm going to come home now with my expectation of owning my expectations in the present. I'm coming home with the thought, I'm here for a hug and a kiss. You got to picture this, guys. Now I come in the back door, and since we had large family and Bonnie could be anywhere in the basement, the main floor, or upstairs. She could be any of those places. So I'd come on the back porch area once you entered the house, and there's this platform there, and there's stairs going downstairs, and there's some stairs going upstairs to the kitchen area. And so I stand in there going, I'm home, I'm here for a hug and a kiss. Okay, that's what I'm going to say. And then she'd say, I'm downstairs, or I'm upstairs, or I'm here. And I go get my little, I think this really needs to be demonstrated, Bonnie. I think you can't just say that. Have to show. I'm going to give you an example of what I meant by a hug and a kiss. I just meant a hug like this and a kiss. That's it. That was my expectation. All right. Well, but that night I was feeling particularly exuberant, and I don't know what it got into me, but I thought I wasn't just going to say it. So I'm standing in the back platform and I'm going, you know what? I'm not just going to say this. I'm going to sing it out. But I don't know Mrs. Finley's upstairs. The most sophisticated lady maybe in the nation, all right, is upstairs in the presentation of the pot roast ceremony that's going on with Bonnie. I don't know this. So I'm down there and I go like this. I go, I'm home, 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 I'm home. I am belting this out. I sang it louder than I just did now, all right? And belted that thing out. And Bonnie is upstairs, and you're not going to be able to see this, but she was waving her hand behind her back. You won't be able to see that very well, but she's waving her hand like this behind her back, and of course, her communication signal was then, don't do what you're doing, stupid. No, I mean, no, that's the rough interpretation of that, meaning that. But if you're pushing your hand behind your back, that can just mean a lot of things to men, for one thing. It can mean different things. And I'm not going to go into what that could be. I'm just going to tell you it can mean a lot of different things when somebody's going like this. Well, nevertheless, I didn't get the message. I didn't get that message at all. I just, we got kids. She could be doing a number of things there. Maybe he's twitching after a whole day's work. I don't know. But she's up there giving me this massive signal. And so then I belt out the last part of it. I'm here for a hug and a kiss. And I came in the kitchen just as I said, and a kiss, and looked right at Mrs. Finley. Now, this is a lady, remember, that always had something appropriate to say, never caught off guard. She looked like this. I mean, her mouth was open, her jaw was dropped, speechless, absolutely speechless. And then Bonnie said two very profound things that gave her a moment to kind of come back into reality there. And the first thing that Bonnie said was, it's my husband. The second thing was, he's home. I didn't know if you had a third thing to say. It might have been he's here for a hug and a kiss, but you didn't say that. Mrs. Finley just kind of got her composition back. And, Dr. Lund, I've got my husband, and we'll be out. I think she thought I was going to give her the kiss. I don't know if that's what she really thought or not, but no. But anyway, Bonnie afterwards said to me, she said, don't you know what this means? And I said, I am not going to tell you what I thought that meant at all. Not even going to go there. That's a ballpark that's out of there. I'm not in this at all. Communications. Well, I probably should have been a little more attentive to that, and it responded. But I can tell you that I would rather have a few embarrassing moments by owning that expectation of wanting that hug and a kiss of affection that meant a lot to me and still does. That would mean more to me than an immaculate house. That would mean more to me than a number of other things could mean. And so in terms of our different value system, being able to communicate our expectations and communicating so clearly they can't be misunderstood. But also with this little story about Mrs. Finley, owning them in the present. It's worth it. It's worth owning your expectations in the present. For example, again, like Mrs. Finley, honey, tonight your mother's coming over, and so I really need you to be home by 5:30. Can you be home by 5:30? And so if I'm really going to be a good communicator, guess what? I need to then respond and say, yes, I'm going to be home by 5:30. So she knows that I heard what she has to say. Now, this is where, as men, we don't do a very good job in our communication. We don't give what we call tellback. Now, tellback is a really important principle, and it's used in the military. Now, we have a son. He's a captain in the Navy, spent 14 years on a nuclear submarine. He's actually retired now. It's interesting. And 10 years aboard aircraft carriers. And I got to go out of the Puget Sound area and go up through the Straits of Juan de Fuca on what's called a boomer submarine. It was the 727 Michigan, I think, USS Michigan. And this, just to give you an idea, these submarines that we were talking about, nuclear submarines, they have an incredible power. There are like 20 silos. Each silo has multiple nuclear heads in it. They can send off this missile out of this thing. 7 different nuclear warheads can go in 7 different directions. They can all be programmed to come to the same place, but arrive at different angles, or they can go to 7 different places. They can go that. But one U.S. nuclear submarine, it's not an exaggeration, has more firepower than all the bombs dropped in World War II by all nations. One of our submarines has that kind of power. They're all nuclear, all right? It's incredible. So that is an important part of this story. So we're going out, and they get out. We're in the Straits of Juan de Fuca, and at that point, the captain, who was the captain, said to my son, who was at that time a junior officer, he said, because he knew I was there as his father, he said, Lund, he said, would you dive the ship? And so my son gets up, and he has to say that he has the con. I have the conning tower. I have the con, okay? And then he goes, make your depth 200 feet, down degree 5 bubble. That's foreign language to me. I kind of figure it out a little bit. But the guy standing next to him over here, there's another officer, he goes, make your depth, sir, make your depth 200 feet, down degree 5 bubble. And then there's a plainsman over here, and he's got takes the submarine up and down, and he goes, aye, sir, make your depth 200 feet, down degree 5 bubble. So I said to my son, are they a little slow on this ship? I mean, why are you repeating everything so often like that? He said, Dad, we call that tailback, but he said, how many mistakes would you like us to make aboard a nuclear submarine? Does that give you an idea? And my response was, make your depth 200 feet, down degree 5 bubble. I don't want there to be any mistakes. And you don't either. And so they brought a message out. Now, this was a trial, like if they were actually under nuclear conditions and they had a war. And so there's a message that comes across. This is an alert, and they have to act as if it really were. And so now they're going to go to a point where they're going to say cancel, and there's a cancel on it. But they come out, and 2 men come out. 2 men come out of the radio area, and they've got this message here. And 2 men are looking at this message, and the one will say 5, A, George. I mean, they go through and say all of these words and numbers and things, and there's probably 15 of them or whatever, but one says it, the other repeats it, and they go back overward and they make sure that they both agree that that's right, and then the captain assures, is that correct? And he looks at it himself, and then they program it in, bing, 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 and they get it programmed in, and then they're ready to fire the missiles. That's what they're ready to do. Again, they don't want to take a chance that there could be any miscommunication. And so they give what they call tellback. So I'm suggesting that as men, now I'm going to jump a little bit ahead here to tell you, on average, this is average again, there will be exceptions to this, and I'll get into this on love language a little bit more. The average man uses between 3,000 and 7,000 words a day. The average woman doesn't even begin with 7,000. She's up to 15,000 to 25,000 words. Quite a range. Men are in a range like this of 3,000 to 7,000 words, and women are in a range of like this, That's how many more words they use. So when a man comes home, a woman's inclined to say, honey, how was your day? And the man's inclined to say, fine, good, it's all right. That's it. He's not going to say much more than that. Unless there's something really exceptional that may be happening he wants to point out. But what if the woman really wants more conversation? Well, I'm going to reserve those thoughts for our next presentation. We're going to give on love language. We're talking about some of men-women differences, and that'll make a little more sense to you. But what I'm talking about right now is that for communication purposes, we need to understand that we do have differences, but here's where men could help out a lot in their communications, and that is to give tailback. So when your wife or your significant other says something to you, if you, instead of just agreeing, yeah, I got it, bread and milk, yep. Actually say, so you want bread and you want milk. Now, the reason I say that is now, if you don't, she might think, I don't think he understands. I'm going to have to repeat myself 50 times before I really know that he really understands what I want. Now, that can get irritating about the 47th time, right? Well, I heard you the first time. Well, how does she know that you really heard her the first time? She'll know if you give her tailback. If you'll just say, and that's called active listening, it's called feedback. There's a number of words for it, but that's how you'll really know to be able to do that. Now, Bonnie, if you come up here one more time, I'd like to, and we'll kind of wrap this up here. This what I'm going to share is that it means a lot to me if and right now we're retired and everything, but even when we weren't, I would like, for example, I want to help, and I'm more than happy to do dishes, or I'm more than happy to clean the floor. By the way, what did I do today? You can do that today.
Yes, you did all the floors.
And the dishes, and make the bed, and happy to do all that. I do that every day, by the way. No, I don't do all the floor every day, but I always sweep it and everything. But I do that and I love you for her because it means a lot to her, and so I'm willing to do that. We'll talk about that when we get to love language. You'll understand the difference it makes a little then. But the point I'm trying to make is not that I'm a great guy, but the point I'm trying to make here is that when I do those kind of things, I would like appreciation for it. Now, Bonnie can do those things and feel appreciated just saying it needed to be done, and I did it, and that's all there is to it. She doesn't need any appreciation for it. But my motivation for doing it was because I loved her and cared about her, and I want to be appreciated. I want her to at least acknowledge or recognize that I made those efforts. Are you getting what I mean? Oh, this puts us in an awkward position because, see, I expect her now to know that I need this. But let's get back to owning it in the present. So here's owning it in the present. Honey, I did the floors, I did the dishes, and I did a bunch of, I'd like you to come down. I need a little oohing and awing. Ooh, okay? So what happens?
Thank you for doing the floors.
You'll find out why this is important. She'll actually take hold of my arm. Now, because I'm a kind of a touch-centered guy, and so that makes, that's significant to me. So she takes my arm, and guess what we do? We tour the kitchen. And while we're touring the kitchen, I'm pointing out to her what I've done. Just wanted you to know I really did the floors. Yeah, we had 8 people over last night, which we did, and the grandchildren, okay? Disaster. Anyway, did it all. So I cleaned it all up. I'm happy to do that. But I pointed out to her, and then I thought, and also on, the dishes, they just left a mess in the sink.
I know it. It was awful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, all right.
Is that enough oohing and awing?
No, I did. I want you to know, you wanted that, the part of the vents, you wanted those clean over the stove, the hood, the vents. I cleaned those out.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Now she's acknowledged it. She doesn't have to really oh, that sounds so phony. No, what I wanted was acknowledgement. She acknowledged it. Now I'm motivated. That's gasoline in my tank. I'm motivated. Now I'm willing to do more of that. But what if I don't get what I want out of that? What if I'm just expecting her just to somehow recognize it on her own? But she's out doing all kinds of things herself. She's highly productive. She's not lying around in bathrobes watching TV and eating popcorn or something. She's a very productive type person. So she gets her own rewards and assumes that I'm getting my own rewards myself. But I'm not. I want a small monument and a band. Well, it doesn't have to be quite that bad. But at least an ooh and an ah, or at least acknowledgement. But owning that is all the difference in the world between feeling not frustrated and feeling a sense of appreciation and feeling valued. So I'm saying if you need appreciation, don't be afraid to say, I feel the need to be appreciated. Oh, wow, okay. And you may say, well, I feel need to be appreciated too. Well, then you tell me what you feel need to be appreciated for, and I'll tell you what I feel and need to be appreciated for. And we can maybe find ways of doing that. And I think that'll make just a really tremendous difference here. Here's a question I'll close with, and that is, this is a great question to ask. What could I do for you today that would mean the most to you? And you're going to find out if you'll ask that question, and I'm going to challenge all of you, if you want to be here in the next couple of weeks when we have our presentation on love language, you'll see how important that question is, because that question will help you understand your mate's love language, or your significant other, or even your children, or your in-laws and outlaws. When you ask this particular kind of question, what could I do for you today that would mean the most to you? You're going to find that they're going to respond in one of three ways, which we're going to talk about later. But I would like you to start asking that question every day, if you can remember, but just ask that question and see what the response is. I can tell you right now, I know what Bonnie's response is going to be. There will be some things that she'd like me to do. And I might say, I'd like to go for a little walk and just have you hold my hand and go for a little walk. That would be that's what you could do for me today that would mean the most to me. And you'll see how this will kind of fit into a pattern that you are intuitively going to respond to yourself. You'll figure out, and we'll give you a little bit of a quiz also in a couple of weeks here about what love language is. But I just want you to know that what a wonderful world we can live in, and how much more we can improve all of our relationships if we can learn to speak each other's love language. But even more than that, if we can learn to communicate more clearly by owning our words, owning our expectations, and doing it in the present. And thank you all very much. Okay. Now, I said I'd open it up for questions, so I don't know if you've got questions that sometimes we might have questions that come in over the phone, or that come in, and sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. But if you folks that are here tonight have questions you want to ask about that communication things, feel free to ask, okay? And if not, it's fine too. Tom, do you have a question? Oh. Oh, okay. Or Bonnie, do you have any comments you want to add to what was said tonight?
No, I think you covered it very well.
Okay.
Notice I have not put the camera on anybody for this episode.
Yeah, okay.
You know, in the content communication that you're describing and so forth, you know, there's a tendency for some people to over communicate, and there's a tendency to under communicate. Sometimes over communication is offensive to many, and sometimes obviously under communication is obvious.
Yeah, and I kind of talked about under communication, and I think you bring up a great point. You talk about over communication, and that's an example of somebody assuming there's two things that happen when you over communicate. The person you're over communicating to probably is going to feel that you think they're inadequate, that you don't comprehend and get it. And so they're over communicating, right? Are you following? But the person that you're over communicating, the person that's on the receiving end feels like, so you think I'm a moron, I'm inadequate, and I don't get it? So that's why you keep giving me all this information I really don't need. But however, Bonnie, sometimes there's another motivation for people giving all that information. And why is it sometimes you might give me a lot of over communication?
Well, women tend to do this, I think, more than men. And that is, I would like to tell John how I feel about it and how I came to this conclusion. And before I even get to what the point of the story is. And so sometimes that's why we over communicate.
Yeah, and so I mean, so that is almost gender sensitive, meaning that more women tend to over communicate than men over communicate. Generally, that when I make these statements, there's a continuum. Most men are here, most women are there, and there's an overlap. And some men are here and some women are there. And so don't think you're weird if you happen to fall in one of those overlap areas. But that's a good point that you bring up. Yes, please.
So what would be a kindly way to inform your wife she's over communicating?
Yes.
Rather than I will.
Okay, I think.
He doesn't do that.
Okay, I know, but in a relationship, here's what I would do. The question is, what would be a good way for maybe a woman to respond to her husband or somebody that so she could send that message? She might, it might be that she'd say, if the man is going to respond, he'd say, honey, I think you want me to, what you want from me is this. Make sure that he gives that tailback. If he gives her that tailback, she may then, oh, I get it. He gets it. He gets it. But if he doesn't give that tailback, that's probably one of the reasons there's over communication, because she is not convinced that he has really gotten it yet. But if you can cut it short. So what I'm saying, gentlemen, is you can shorten your wife's conversations if you'll actually give them tailback. You really will, because they'll know then that you understand what it is that they want. I think that's really critical. Question, any other comments? Anybody else? There's more feedback if you want. I'm game.
Well, I have the advantage, of course,
Yes.
hearing you for years and years and years on this. And I think there's one point that you can make right now that you guys have done in the past, where sometimes Bonnie's giving you a lot of information, but you're concentrating on something.
Yes.
You know what I'm talking
Right.
about?
Well, yeah. Okay. Now, what Diane's just raised here, an interesting observation is about, for example, Bonnie may be giving me information, all right? And I may get that information, but guess what? It's over, specifically, you're talking about the over.
Swedish grandmother. Your Swedish grandfather.
Oh, yeah. Well, okay, Diane, the reference there is to the story I like to tell about that this is about men. I'm going to get into this on our men-women differences, but just to give you an idea. Men are monotaskers. Now, what that means is that we tend to focus on either talking, thinking, or listening. We tend to focus on one of those three areas. Women are multitaskers. You can talk, think, and listen all at once. Now, it doesn't mean that as men, we do, but we have dimmer switches. Believe me, we have dimmer switches. So we put those dimmer switches on, bing. And that means if I'm really thinking and Bonnie's talking, she sounds like my Swedish grandfather. I mean, that's what he sounds like, a little bit like that. But because it's almost gibberish to me a little bit, except now I understand a little more Swedish. But I can tell you that I can hear Bonnie. I hear her voice. I'm not understanding a word she's saying. I just hear her voice. Who do you have here? Because I'm thinking. And then after a couple of minutes, Bonnie will realize that I haven't been listening. So she'll come over and put her hand, she doesn't come and slap me or anything, but she might put her hand on my shoulder. All of a sudden I get attention. What? Yeah? What? Didn't you hear what I just been telling you? You may want to run it by me again, because no, I didn't. I was thinking. Well, why can't you think and listen and talk? Well, I can tell you that it makes you ladies wonderful mothers to be able to talk, think, and listen all at the same time. It doesn't make you particularly good wives, but it makes you great mothers. It doesn't make men necessarily great husbands because they're not multitaskers, but it makes them great protector providers. See, if I'm out there and I'm sword fighting, we're back in the days of sword fighting now, and I'm sword fighting, where should my focus be? Where would you like my focus to be? Should it be on, I wonder if Bonnie wants that couch moved from the upstairs to the downstairs. And you ladies can do that. You can think about other things while you're doing an activity. But guess what happened to those men that had that kind of brain function? They're dead. They're all dead. They have been systematically wiped out of our society. They're not here anymore, because that is a male tendency and trait. It's a mind focusing. It's one of the things that separates men's brain function from women's brain function. They look the same, but they don't function the same. You give a man information, you give a woman information, it'll take a different pathway through the brain. A different path. That's not me. That's Dr. Brizendine. She's a neurologist, graduated at Yale, taught at Harvard Medical School, currently at UC Berkeley, and she's a medical MD neurologist and devoted her life to study of the brain. She wrote a book called The Female Brain, and that's where she said, you give a man a message and a woman a message, the same exact message, it'll take a different pathway through the brain. So we don't process information the same way. So I don't know if I've answered some of those questions that you wanted, but just know that just because we're not the same, the solution, the thing that really brings us all together. See, everything I've talked about, even all these questions, everything else, the clearer we can communicate our expectations, the fewer frustrations there are going to be for everybody. And the happier I think we'll be with fewer frustrations. So it's a wonderful thing to own your expectations and own them clearly. So clearly you can't be misunderstood, but do it in a kindly way. So I like this couplet, and I'll end with that. Say what you mean and mean what you say, and do it in a kindly way. Thank you again. All right, we'll end with that. So we'll have a closing prayer.
Closing prayer. Thank you all for coming, and drive carefully. And remember, nothing happening next week. In 2 weeks, we'll be back to hear about love language with Dr. Lund. Thank you all for coming.
Our Father in heaven, so very thankful to be here this evening and to hear Dr. Lund help us to communicate better with our spouses, our family, and co-workers. We're thankful for all that we have. We recognize thy hand in all that we have, so thankful for the gospel, the light that it is in our lives. We pray that thou will be with us as we travel this evening, that we may do so in safety. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. I'll tell you where this communication thing comes in for me. It comes in under correct principles. I teach them correct principles and they govern themselves, the prophet Joseph taught. This, I think, is a correct principle of communication and will help us. And President Lee's statement, communicate so clearly you can't be misunderstood. So anyway, great. All right, thanks, folks.
And if any of you are a rabbit here, I need to say that one time. You just need to do 5 rows of 10. And you look for your registers.
Yeah. And thank you, folks, for coming tonight here. I want you to know I didn't expect anybody to be here tonight. I thought it was going to be a Zoom presentation where I just do it over the broadcast thing, but I'm really tickled pink that you're all here.